We are back. We are back. Today, we're going to talk about the geography of your career. And what does that mean? On a local level, on any level, the city you reside in or you're based in can have a major effect on the success of your career. For some of you, this could be fortunate. For some of you, this is unfortunate, obviously. On a local level, from a genre perspective, like where you live might just determine even how often you play at the most local level, right? And I'm going to give you an example. Here where I live in Miami, 80 to 90% of the clubs that are doing electronic music are very, very tech house driven. It doesn't mean that we don't have other genres, but I would say 80 to 90% of the time, you're going to hear some version of tech house, deep tech house, kind of everything within that same family. What does this mean? If you're like a hard techno artist, is there options for you? Yes, but they're slim. If you're an Afro artist, is there some option for you? Of course, they're slim and they're mostly going to be restaurant place. Just even on a local level, depending on the genre or music direction you want to go, this could have a huge impact on how you grow now. Now, obviously, when we go into like a touring aspect, there's other things that can determine this. Like if you're making massive hits, you could potentially be anywhere. If you make a massive hit and you get that sign and it is marketed correctly, that can change the entire outcome. But people making massive hits like that are very slim and few. So today we're going to talk about this because we want to increase your probability of success. Since in reality, very few of you will succeed and turn this into a professional career. Like I said, on a local level, you want to know what's happening in your market. If there's not a place for you to play because of your sound, you have one of two options. One, you can try to pave the way for that, find a venue that's willing to have your sound and truly build a night. But if there's not a fan base for that, you're kind of stuck and you're going to have to focus on production, marketing, and you're going to have to travel to gig. And usually, when you're not in any kind of demand, promoters outside your market aren't going to just book you to book you when they have talent in their market that locals know, right? And promoters want to see that you can bring a crowd at any level. I mean, that is the reality. Like, you do need to have some type of support system. Openers aren't as expected to bring as much as maybe like a main slot or a headliner is, but you're still expected to have some type of support if you want reoccurring gigs. What you could do to combat this without moving is, like I said, build your own scene, find ravers, find clubbers that like the music you're doing, and try to build something authentically. And then option B would be to move where things make most sense. And that's just for like local growth. Now, when you want to talk about getting your music signed, building relationships, all that, being in a major city like Miami, New York, LA, maybe Chicago, Ibiza, Berlin, London. There's a bunch of other cities like this, but these cities house labels, they house A&Rs, they house big time promoters, distro companies are there, PR companies, all these things. So when you're going out and socializing in the scene, you're more likely to build relationships with these people that are there versus if you're in a smaller city that doesn't have any I guess you would say movers or shakers of your industry. You're only going to have a chance at building a relationship with them via email or maybe social media. And I've already discussed how challenging that can be when you're fairly unknown. So your plan B will be to travel to these places a couple of times a year, but that limits your probability of seeing them versus if you're living in these cities week after week after week, you're just eventually bound to bump into the right people and build relationships with them. And that's like the big city advantage. But even at that, just because you're in a city like Miami, if you're maybe a hard techno or a melodic techno or a drum and bass or a dubstep artist or something that really isn't part of the Miami culture at the moment, you're even though we might have those label owners and big time promoters here, if they're not really into that sound or supporting that sound, just because you live in a big city, you don't get that advantage. And the best analogy of this, I mean, this kind of goes with every industry, right? If you were going to be a country artist, it would be crazy to not live in Nashville. If you were doing comedy, you would want to be in New York, LA, Austin. If you were, I don't know about now, but 5, 6 years ago, if you were trying to get into big tech, you'd want to move to San Francisco. Finance, you'd be in New York. There's a formula to like any industry you want to work at, where you at some point you need to make a decision if you want to move there. For decades, people move to Hollywood to aspire for fame as an actor, an actress, or a musician in other like in more pop form. So unfortunately for you, if you don't live in the right city or you live in a small city, at some point in your career, if you're planning to really take this seriously, you might need to consider moving, unfortunately. And if that's not something you're into doing, just know your probability of success. I mean, even if you live in the perfect place and you make great music and everything on paper seems to check every box that you should succeed, the odds are still stacked against you. So every little box that isn't checked makes it even harder. And geography, this isn't talked about a lot, plays a big role in it. And then that's just from a local level, being in right genre, right place. Then next is, like I just said, networking. And then the next one is even like on a touring path. Once you start touring, being based in a city where you have a lot of flights that make it cost effective, because and I'm going to talk about this in a future video about touring economics, but most of the time artists are covering their own travel costs, at least the flights. So when you're in a place like Miami, New York, London, certain cities of Spain like Barcelona, Madrid, those two really, Lisbon, any major city that has a major international airport hub that has lots of flights, being in one of those cities could reduce your flights a lot. Like being in Miami makes it very cost effective to travel to South America, travel throughout the United States, and there's a lot of direct flights to Europe. Same thing when you're doing your summer tours in Europe, being living in maybe Barcelona, Ibiza, Madrid, London, Berlin, there's so many flights in and out, it's very cheap, versus if you live in a more difficult city where it requires you always to have a layover, those flights are not only sometimes more costly, but they also just put more travel stress on you, and when you get to a point in your career where you're doing 100 plus gigs a year, 200 gigs a year, you want to reduce the amount of time you're in airports. It's just a reality. You want to have more time to have a social life. You want to have more time to work on music, to talk with your team, and so on and so forth. So there will be a point in your touring career where you're going to want to strategically place yourself from a routing perspective. And then it's just really luck and timing, again, in this career, like, you could do everything correctly. You can have great music that's getting supported by artists that are on great labels, that are getting good numbers on Beatport and streaming and all these things, and your social media could be great, and you just don't have that luck. You don't meet those exact right connections that are going to help you move the needle. We see it all the time. You can look at your favorite DJ sets and you'll see unbelievable music that's getting supported by everybody, that's charting everywhere. And for whatever reason, those artists aren't having tour schedules. And we all know that the music on its own is not enough to sustain this career professionally unless you're doing hundreds of millions of plays. My biggest recommendation to you is first figure out your path musically. And then from there, you could start making decisions on where you may or may not need to be geographically, especially young. I mean, if you're a tech house artist in the United States right now, being in Miami, New York, Chicago, LA can can dramatically change things. There's a lot more local gigs, there's a lot more opportunities, and there's a lot more relationships to be made versus if you're in like a B or C city, right? That isn't quite as big and there's not as many options. Like take take Orlando or Tampa, for example, great cities, massive amount of tourists, but the clubs are limited, right? And the promoters that are doing things there right now are doing great things, but it's just limited because there's so much other forms of entertainment that people travel to those cities for that they're not always going for raves and parties. Whereas Miami is just a party capital. New York has 10x the amount of people than any other city, and people generally go and visit it for some form of entertainment, and partying is one of those forms. That's it. I wanted to keep this one short. I wanted to hit some topics. often I have a lot of artists come to me here in Miami that play great music, that are doing great things, but their genres don't align with one, what I prefer to do, and two, what I know is going to work in this city. Um, so I figured I would offer this advice early in their career. And for those of you willing to roll the dice, take the leap of faith, and maybe make the big move, it may or may not increase your odds. And some of you may make the move and just not fall into the right luck. That is the reality. As always, thanks for tuning in. I hope this was very helpful. Good luck to you. And if you want some one-on-one time with me, there's a link in the description below to connect with me. And in the meantime, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow. It really helps us grow. We appreciate it, and we appreciate you. See you on the next video.